South of Newberg, Oregon, there's a bridge on State Highway 219 over a creek called Hess Creek. You have never heard of it. It does not have a famous name. It does not appear in architecture textbooks. It does not have a Wikipedia page with photographs and engineering specifications. It is a bridge that looks, from the road, exactly like 8,000 other bridges in the Oregon highway system. Concrete deck, guardrails on each side, the kind of structure that the human brain categorizes instantly as infrastructure and stops seeing. Every day, more than 20,000 vehicles cross this bridge. Every day. Not a quiet county road, not a rural access track, a state highway, with 20,000 vehicles on it every single day. Commuters from the Yamhill Valley, trucks carrying agricultural freight from Oregon's wine country, school buses, emergency vehicles, families. 20,000 times a day, a vehicle drives over this bridge, and the driver thinks about something else entirely, because the bridge looks fine. From the surface, the deck, the railings, the painted center line, it looks like every other bridge in Oregon. Here is what is underneath it. The substructure of the Hess Creek Bridge rests on timber columns. Those timber columns are 12 inches in diameter, each one, 12 inches across. And when Oregon Department of Transportation bridge inspectors examined those columns, they found the following. All but the outer 1.5 inches of each column is rotted. Not surface rot, not weathering. Deep structural rot. From the core outward, 10.5 inches of rot in a 12-inch column. The only material that is not rotted, the only material carrying the weight of a state highway bridge with 20,000 daily crossings, is a shell of wood, 1.5 inches thick, 1.5 inches, on the outside of a timber column, carrying the bridge above it, and 20,000 vehicles per day crossing it every single day. That is the beginning. This is the rest of the story. Here is what the Oregon Department of Transportation's 2024 Bridge Condition Report does not fully explain. The report is an official government document. It is published annually. It is publicly available on ODOT's website. It describes in precise technical language the condition of Oregon's highway bridges. It included the Hess Creek Bridge. It described the columns. It stated the measurement, 12-inch diameter timber columns, all but the outer 1.5 inches rotted. It stated that the bridge was repaired in 2024 by the Major Bridge Maintenance Program. It was repaired, the repair was made, the bridge is still open. What the report does not explain, what the plain language of rotted structural members, carrying 20,000 vehicles per day does not capture in isolation, is how this bridge came to be in this condition. How a bridge on a state highway with 20,000 daily crossings was carrying its load on 1.5 inches of surviving wood. How the bridge had passed annual inspections year after year while the rot progressed from the inside of each column outward. How the gap between what a bridge looks like from the road and what its structural elements look like from underneath represents, in Oregon right now, not one bridge, but a systemic condition. More than 1 in 5 bridges in Oregon was rated as distressed in 2024. That is ODOT's own finding, from ODOT's own report. Released in April 2025. Not distressed as in showing minor wear, distressed as in the technical language of Oregon's bridge management program, requiring immediate or near-term intervention to prevent failure or loss of service, more than 1 in 5. Oregon also has the fewest number of bridges in good condition of any western state measured by the federal standards used to compare infrastructure across state lines. Fewer in good condition than Washington, fewer than California, fewer than Idaho, fewer than Nevada, fewer than Utah, fewer than Arizona, the fewest in the American West. This is not a story about one bridge on a creek near Newberg. This is a story about a state that has been falling behind on its bridge infrastructure for years, that knows it, has documented it, publishes that documentation publicly, and continues to fall further behind because the rate of deterioration exceeds the rate at which any currently available funding allows it to respond. And the Hess Creek Bridge, the bridge whose timber columns were 87.5% rot when the inspector measured them, is the face of that system. Not the worst case. The example chosen by ODOT's own engineers to illustrate what is happening under the bridges you cannot see from the road. Start in 1958, Newberg, Oregon. The bridge is built on Oregon Highway 219. The year is 1958. Dwight D. Eisenhower is president. The first McDonald's franchise has just opened. The first American commercial jet flight has just happened. The bridge is designed for the vehicles of 1958. Passenger cars of that era weigh approximately 3,200 to 3,800 pounds. Commercial trucks are lighter and shorter than modern freight configurations. Traffic volumes on Oregon 219 in 1958 are a fraction of what they are today. The bridge is built to last. In 1958, timber substructures are standard for bridges of this class on Oregon state highways. Douglas fir, the timber species used in Pacific Northwest bridge construction, is strong, available, and cost-effective. For bridges of this span and load class, timber pile substructures are the designed solution. They work. For decades, they work exactly as designed. But timber has a property that concrete and steel do not. It is organic. And organic material in a wet environment, in a creek valley south of Newburgh, where moisture is constant, where the timber columns sit in contact with soil and are subject to seasonal wet-dry cycling in the Pacific Northwest climate, decomposes over time. The decomposition process begins at the points of greatest moisture exposure, at the base of the column, at the contact point between timber and earth, at the places where water pools and does not drain. The decomposition is not visible from above. It is not visible from the road deck. It is not visible to a driver crossing at 50 miles per hour. It is visible only to a trained inspector who goes underneath the bridge, who physically probes the timber with a metal pick, who measures the depth of the rot, and who records the diameter of sound wood remaining. That inspection happens. ODOT inspects its bridges on a schedule. The Hess Creek Bridge received its inspection. The inspector found the rot. The inspector measured it. All but the outer 1.5 inches of each timber column is rotted. The inspector filed the report. The report entered ODOT's bridge management system. The system assigned the finding a priority rating. The rating triggered the Major Bridge Maintenance Program. The MBM program deployed a repair crew. The repair was completed in 2024. The bridge was maintained. The system worked. And here is what a system that worked correctly, went from inspection to report to repair, still leaves unanswered. How many vehicles crossed the Hess Creek Bridge on the day before the repair crew arrived? How many school buses? How many freight trucks? How many emergency vehicles carrying weight loads that are heavier per axle than standard commercial traffic use that bridge as their fastest route to a residential neighborhood south of Newburgh? Those vehicles crossed on timber columns where the structural wood remaining was 1.5 inches thick. In a 12-inch column, those crossings happened, every one of them, before the repair, after the rot had progressed to that measurement, after all but the outer 1.5 inches had become structurally compromised. Stop here. Because what all but the outer 1.5 inches rotted actually means in structural engineering terms, and why the gap between 1.5 inches of surviving wood and 0 inches of surviving wood is not the right way to understand the risk, is the part that the measurement alone does not convey. Here is what a timber pile actually does in a bridge substructure. The bridge deck, the surface you drive on, sits on beams. The beams rest on a cap. The cap sits on the piles. The piles transfer the entire weight of the bridge, the deck, the beams, the cap, and every vehicle on it, into the ground. In a timber pile substructure, each pile is a single column of wood. Its structural capacity, the load it can safely carry, is a function of two properties: the cross-sectional area of sound wood, and the wood's specific structural grade and species characteristics. A 12-inch diameter timber pile with all wood intact has a specific design load capacity. That capacity is calculated by the bridge designer and confirmed to be adequate for the traffic loads the bridge is expected to carry. Now rot the interior of that pile. The rot does not distribute load to the sound wood at the perimeter. The rot simply means that material has ceased to carry load. The effective structural cross-section of the pile is now the area of sound wood remaining. A 12-inch column with 1.5 inches of sound wood on the perimeter has lost approximately 90% of its original cross-sectional area. Not 90% of its original load capacity. The relationship between cross-section and load capacity is not linear, and the perimeter fibers of a bending column carry disproportionate stress, but a reduction of that magnitude is not a minor degradation. It is a column that is carrying a load for which it was designed at full section, on a fraction of that section. And timber rot does not progress at a uniform rate. It does not stop at 1.5 inches of remaining wood and wait for the inspector to arrive. It continues. It is driven by moisture content, fungal activity, and the thermal cycles of the Pacific Northwest climate. A column measured at 1.5 inches of sound wood this year may have 1.2 inches next year, or 0.9. Or, if a freeze-thaw cycle opens new pathways for moisture penetration, if a particularly wet winter increases the fungal activity in the wood, the progression could be faster. The critical point is not where the column is today, it is where it was going, and the answer to where it was going is a column failure. In structural engineering, a column failure under static load does not announce itself. A timber column with 90% rot carrying a fully loaded state highway does not develop visible cracks before it fails. It does not sag. It does not give the driver on the bridge a warning that they are on a compromised structure. It fails, in a fraction of a second, under a load that finally exceeds what the remaining wood can carry. On a bridge carrying 20,000 vehicles per day, that load arrives continuously, every few seconds. Every passing vehicle is a test of the remaining structural capacity. The Hess Creek Bridge passed those tests until the repair crew arrived. Thousands of times, tens of thousands of times. That it passed them is not evidence that the risk was not real. It is evidence that the timing, the geometry, and the weather did not produce the specific combination of load and condition that the 1.5-inch shell of wood could not sustain. That combination did not arrive. The repair crew arrived first. Here is what the 2024 repair does not resolve. The Hess Creek Bridge was repaired in 2024. The Major Bridge Maintenance Program fixed it. The bridge is open today. The columns that were carrying Oregon 219's 20,000 daily crossings on 1.5 inches of sound wood have been addressed. The system worked. What the system cannot fix, what the repair of one bridge on a creek near Newburgh does not resolve, is the inventory of which it is part. Over 200 bridges in Oregon's state highway system still have some form of timber elements. Not historical bridges, not retired bridges, active bridges on public roads carrying traffic. Nearly half of Oregon's state highway bridges are over 50 years old. Bridges built, like the Hess Creek structure, for vehicles and traffic volumes that no longer exist. Vehicles that were smaller, lighter, and less numerous than the vehicles using those bridges today. The ODOT 2024 Bridge Condition Report states this directly. Nearly half of the state's bridges were never intended for today's heavy loads and traffic volumes. The same report notes that new vehicle configurations, the longer, heavier commercial trucks that modern freight logistics require, result in greater, more concentrated stress points on older bridge structures. Oregon's bridge inspection program assigns a condition rating from 0 to 9 to each structural element of every bridge it inspects. A rating of 4 is defined as poor condition, widespread advanced deterioration of primary structural elements, structural element loss. Scour has undermined abutments or piers to the point that critical loss of the abutment or pier has occurred. Rating 4 is the threshold at which ODOT's bridge management system classifies a bridge as structurally deficient. Rating 3 is serious condition, potential failure and requiring prompt remedial action. Rating 2 is critical condition, failed elements require immediate action. Rating 1 is imminent failure condition. Rating 0 is failed. The Hess Creek Bridge was not at rating 0 when the inspection found the rotted columns. But a bridge whose primary structural members have lost 87.5% of their cross-sectional area is not comfortably above rating 4. And the bridge, for the period between the time the rot reached that condition and the time the repair crew arrived, was carrying Oregon 219, 20,000 vehicles per day. Here is what Oregon's funding situation makes this story a systemic warning, not an isolated incident. ODOT's own report says that under ideal conditions, the agency could replace 27 bridges per year. Oregon has more than 8,000 bridges in its state highway system. There are over 1,000 interstate air bridges, built between 1956 and 1972, that are approaching or have passed the end of their design life. At 27 replacements per year, replacing 1,000 bridges takes 37 years. That 37 years assumes ideal conditions, which ODOT does not have, because the current funding for bridge replacement does not support 27 per year. The actual replacement rate at current funding levels is approximately 3 bridges per year. 3. At 3 replacements per year, replacing 1,000 interstate air bridges takes 333 years. The bridges will not survive 333 years. They will deteriorate. Some will be repaired. Some repairs will be adequate. Some will not be adequate until the repair crew arrives. And while the repair crew has not arrived, the bridge will carry the traffic that uses it. The ODOT report uses a phrase that deserves to sit in isolation. It says, "The future generation is not an abstract concept. It is our children or our grandchildren." The report is describing the bridge replacement backlog. It is saying that the decision not to fund adequate bridge replacement does not eliminate the cost. It defers it to the next generation of taxpayers, or to the generation of drivers who will be on a bridge when the column that was at 1.5 inches of sound wood passes the threshold it was approaching. The Hess Creek Bridge's columns were repaired. The county-owned bridges are not ODOT's responsibility. Of the 3,148 county-owned bridges in Oregon, approximately 3 out of 4 are classified as structurally deficient. 987 of them are restricted for heavy trucks. Emergency vehicles often weigh more than the heaviest restricted truck. When a fire engine needs to reach a house on the other side of one of those 987 restricted bridges, it takes a different route. If a different route exists, if the delay does not matter. The Astoria-Megler Bridge carries Oregon 30 across the Columbia River at the Oregon coast, 4.1 miles long, the longest continuous truss bridge in North America. 4,400 feet of the bridge sits over water where ocean-going vessels transit regularly. In November 2025, ODOT began a vulnerability assessment. Specifically, how vulnerable is the Astoria-Megler Bridge to the kind of vessel strike that collapsed the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore on March 26, 2024, killing 6 members of a maintenance crew who were filling potholes at 1:28 in the morning? The ODOT 2025 Bridge Condition Report states it plainly. The Astoria-Megler Bridge may be vulnerable to collapse due to a vessel collision. It states, if the results of the vulnerability assessment show the bridge is above the acceptable level of risk, ODOT needs to Determine short and long-term strategies to reduce the probability of a potential bridge collapse from a vessel strike. The assessment is underway. Results have not been released. The bridge carries approximately 4,000 vehicles per day. It is the only road connection between Astoria, Oregon, and the Washington coast for 40 miles in either direction. If the Astoria-Megler Bridge were to be closed for any reason, structural failure, vessel strike, seismic damage, the nearest alternative crossing is more than 40 miles east. The assessment is underway. Ocean-going vessels transit beneath it, every day. Both things are true about Oregon's bridges. By any measure of engineering legacy, Oregon's bridge inventory is one of the most historically significant in the American West. The Conde McCullough bridges on the Oregon Coast Highway, the Alsea Bay Bridge, the Yaquina Bay Bridge, the Depot Bay Bridge, the Coos Bay Bridge, are recognized masterpieces of Depression-era public infrastructure, designed by the state bridge engineer whose name they bear. Built between 1927 and 1936, Art Deco concrete structures on the Pacific coast that remain, 90 years later, visually extraordinary. The St. John's Bridge in Portland, a Gothic revival suspension bridge completed in 1931, its towers rising 400 feet above the Willamette. The Astoria-Megler Bridge, the longest continuous truss bridge in North America, completing the Pacific Coast Highway from Mexico to Canada. A bridge inventory that reflects a century of public investment in connecting Oregon's communities across its rivers, its gorges, its coastal inlets, its mountain passes. And Oregon's bridge inventory is also a system where more than 1 in 5 bridges is currently rated as distressed, where nearly half the bridges were designed for vehicles and traffic volumes that no longer represent what they carry, where the timber substructure of a state highway bridge south of Newburgh had 87.5% of its load-carrying cross-section rotted before the repair crew arrived, where an inspection found those columns, measured them, filed the report, and found 1.5 inches of sound wood carrying over 20,000 crossings per day, where the rate of bridge replacement at current funding levels is 3 per year, against a need of 27 per year, against an inventory of more than 1,000 interstate-era bridges approaching the end of their design life, where the Astoria-Megler Bridge, the only crossing for 40 miles in either direction at the Oregon coast, is currently being assessed for vessel strike vulnerability without a public result, while ocean-going ships transit beneath it, every day. The driver crossing the Hess Creek Bridge today does not know that its columns were carrying them on 1.5 inches of wood before the repair. The driver crossing the Astoria-Megler Bridge today does not know whether the vulnerability assessment found an acceptable level of risk. The driver crossing any of Oregon's 1 in 5 distressed bridges today does not know whether their specific bridge has been inspected this year, what the inspector found, whether the finding triggered a repair, and whether the repair crew has arrived. They know what they see from the road: concrete, guardrails, a painted centerline, a bridge that looks exactly like 8,000 others, and they drive across it 20,000 times a day, every day. The Hess Creek Bridge has been repaired. The 1.5-inch columns are addressed. The driver crossing it today is on a structure that has been maintained. And across Oregon, right now, there are bridges that have not been repaired yet, whose inspections are scheduled, whose columns are being measured by someone with a metal pick, whose findings are being entered into a system whose repair crews have not arrived, while the traffic above them continues. 20,000 times a day, every day. Both things are true. Oregon's bridges have carried the state for a century, and the state is falling behind on what it takes to keep carrying you